John Sandsmite from brew-dudes.com. I'm just hanging out in my basement, quarantining. I got my Omega yeast shirt on, and the kids think that it's an avocado toilet seat shirt. I'll let that go. Got my new production staff. You guys will get raises for laughing at that joke. But today we're talking about the brew I just did this weekend. It was a Belgian wit beer, or Belgian white beer. Every spring I like to have a white beer on tap, and this year, even though it's a little bit of a different year, it's still not a different year when it comes to the brew I want on tap. So this year I decided that I'd like to do a Hoegaarden clone. I had a 6-pack of Hoegaarden. I thought I'd do a quarantine-like experiment and actually cultivate the yeast from the bottles and use that in my brew. So let's talk about the recipe. We had 4.5 pounds or 2 kilograms of Belgian Pilsner malt, 4.5 pounds or 2 kilograms of flaked unmalted wheat, and that's the first time I've used unmalted wheat. For the hops, this recipe called for nugget hops. I didn't have nugget hops, but I did have Saaz hops, so I added an ounce of Saaz hops at a 3.1% alpha acid for 60 minutes left to go in the boil. That's 28 grams of Saaz hops. Also, another 28 grams or 1 ounce of Saaz hops with 15 minutes to go in the boil. Now, of course, being a Hoegaarden clone, we've got special ingredients. I added half ounce or 14 grams of freshly ground coriander and a whole ounce, 28 grams of dried ground Curaçao orange peel, or Curaçao orange peel, however you want to pronounce it. Now, the yeast we'll talk about, but I also want to talk about how I worked a step infusion mash for the first time. So I took 2 gallons of water at about 130 degrees Fahrenheit. That's it was 9 quarts, 8.6 liters, and I added that to the grains. And that brought the mash temperature to 122 Fahrenheit or 50 degrees Celsius. Held that for 30 minutes. Did another 9 quarts or 8.6 liters and brought up the temperature to 150 degrees Fahrenheit or 65.5 degrees Celsius. Held that for 60 minutes. I mean, this is the longest mash I've ever done. But you know what? I got time. So that was the mash. I collected 6 gallons of wort, boiled that for 75 minutes, and added all the ingredients. Well, the hops I talked about 50 minutes ago, the coriander and the orange peel, that went in at 5 minutes ago in the boil. Now, the yeast. We actually got a 6-pack of Hoegaarden, and I took the dregs of every single one of those bottles and then added it to a starter I used with the Fast Pitch from Northern Brewer. You pour 1 can of this into your jug, and then you fill this with water, and you add that to your jug, and that's about 1 liter or 32 ounces starter. I added all 6 bottles worth of dregs to that, and then I just waited to see what happened. In 24 hours, I started to see some activity. I was pretty psyched, because a lot of the texts online say, like, I don't know if you're able to do that. They may pasteurize the bottles now, but I got some activity. Once that was done, probably 48 hours, I put that in the refrigerator, let that sit for 2 days, took it out of the refrigerator, decanted, and then added another one of these, another starter. So I had a lot of activity, a pretty strong starter. And then it was kind of winding down, but that's what got added into the beer once it was chilled to fermentation temperatures, which right now it's percolating along, it's bubbling, so that should be good. Right now we're doing it about room temperature, so we'll see how that turns out. Probably going to let it sit for 2 weeks and let it ferment out, and once it's done, we'll carbonate it and taste it. Hopefully we can taste it together in the same room, but you never know. So hopefully you dug that. Hopefully you learned that you can still cultivate the dregs of Hoegaarden, and it does produce, yeast that does smell like the yeast that I'm used to in Hoegaarden. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel. leave a comment below. Let me know all your quarantine-like activities and experiments. For John Sands, Mike, for brew-dudes.com, brew on.